Hello students and welcome to class. It's pretty interesting the topic that we'll be treating today because we're still on the elements of government and we started with basic concepts of government. Previously, we've looked at numerous concepts ranging from power, authority, legitimacy, sovereignty, and most recently we looked at democracy. We talked about how it's a very powerful system of government which we defined as a government for the people, by the people, of the people. Now, today's topic is what we call political culture. Political culture. This is a concept that we need to familiarize ourselves with as government students. So what exactly is political culture and how relevant is it today? Political culture can be defined as the way members of a political community behave. So the political culture of a people defines their behavior. It looks at their behavior when it comes to political activities. Some examples of things that determine political culture are things like voting, exercising your electoral rights, your fundamental rights as a partisan system, and so on and so forth. So when we look at political culture, there are some concepts we need to understand within political culture. In political culture, we are looking at attitudes, beliefs, and the perception of the people towards politics. In this day and age, it is very important to talk about political culture as we see Nigeria gradually moving into their presidential and gubernatorial elections. And we can see a heightened level of what? Political culture amongst the people. That is because people have started to have increased attitude, interest, influence, and having a need to participate in politics. And that's why the concept of political culture is very important for us to understand. So we look at what led to political culture and look at the various types or components of political culture. So we define political culture as the way people behave, their attitude, beliefs, as well as perception towards politics. And we said an example of this is in voting. Political culture sets the standard of behavior of public officials and the citizens generally. Remember, we said one major thing we try to look at here is how members of a particular political community behave. And we've understood that the political culture of the people has a large influence as to the extent in which the political system of a particular state is participatory. By participatory, it means that people in that community have a say in how their political affairs are governed. Now, let's look at the key components of political culture. Components of political culture. Now, there are three major components of political culture. We can list them as one, cognitive orientation. Cognitive orientation. Two, we have what we call evaluative orientation. And finally, we have affective orientation. So let's take a look at them one after the other. So when we talk of the components of political culture, we're trying to see what is or what kind of attitude do people have to political activities, or how do the members of the political community behave? The first one, we talk about cognitive orientation. Here, we see that the people's interest is limited, or it is as low as simply having knowledge about the government and the basic roles and functions of a particular government. So that is what the people know about politics. So their orientation on political affairs is cognitive.
Very, very limited. It is limited to simply knowing about the government, perhaps knowing who is in government, and knowing what the government is meant to do or not meant to do. Beyond that, they have no much knowledge or interest in things that concern politics. So, if we're going to define cognitive orientation, we'll define it as is the belief. Remember, we're talking of the belief of the members of the political community. So this is the belief of people about politics involving knowledge of the government and their roles. And you do know that you will find this type of orientation mostly in rural areas, areas where people do not have sufficient level of education, where they have access to information on the political systems, and thus they are limited in their involvement of politics. Now, taking it a step ahead from the cognitive orientation is where we have the evaluative orientation. Evaluative orientation. From the name, we understand that every system fundamentally, right, should be subject to evaluation. It means that if you decide to be a ruler of a particular set of people, or even in a small space such as an organization, you should be subject to evaluation. And that's why we said evaluative orientation is the extent of people's orientation beyond knowledge of the government and its rules, such that they can evaluate and assess governmental powers. So I'll explain. So now, beyond just knowing who the president is and what the president is meant to do, these people have opinions on how the government is governing and whether or not they think that particular government should continue or should step down. That's what we call an evaluative orientation. So they simply have opinions. They believe, oh, I don't think this government is good enough, and I think that if this person comes on board, they will do better, which is something you find in the average Nigerian. They would rather have beer parlor discussions about politics than actually do what is necessary to, exercise their political right. So by definition, we said evaluative orientation, this is the extent of people's political orientation beyond knowledge of the government and its roles. Such that they can evaluate or assess, that's conduct an assessment, not access now, assess. So you can perform an assessment on performance, on the extent at which they are delivering on maybe the set manifestos in their campaign. So such that they can evaluate or assess the governmental powers or the governmental authority. Now, this is what we call evaluative orientation. Now, beyond evaluative orientation is the last form of orientation, which we expect every political or every member of the political community to be at. This is what we call the affective orientation. This is where people have gone beyond knowing about the government and its roles. They've gone beyond mere assessment or evaluation and are now loyal, having support, and have deep feelings for the particular government and are interested in governmental activities. So from the word affective, we're trying to say that the people have developed feelings, support, and loyalty towards governmental activities and are now affected deeply by the actions and inactions of the government. It is affective orientation that spurs people to go out of their comfort zone to ensure that they exercise their political right to vote or be voted for. It is affective orientation that gives people the zeal to want to aspire for political positions to ensure that they can help, make a particular state or country better. The apex of every political man's participatory apathy, or not apathy now, like it's empathy towards politics, is where they have an affective orientation. So, and that is what countries and states should aspire to spur within their citizens. Because where the people have affective orientation, they are interested in what the government has to offer and are willing to support that government in achieving their goals. So, affective orientation. Affective orientation. So we said here, the people develop feelings, support, and loyalty towards governmental activities and are affected by government actions or inactions. So we've looked at the three major components of political culture, which we recap to be cognitive, evaluative, and affective orientation. Now let's look at what are the determinants of political culture. What influences one's political culture? Determinants of political culture. The first thing that we look at when we're analyzing what influences the political culture of a particular state, country, or continent is one, historical development. Historical development. Activities such as the French Revolution of 1789 and the revolutionary activities that occur within the 19th and 20th century have had an impact on the political mindset or orientation of the people that were involved in that particular revolution. This is when monarchies were seen to be inefficient and the need for a system that encourages one, accountability and responsibility came up. So these historical developments gave the people it sort of spurred the need for people to take up more interest in politics and actually want to be involved in political affairs of people. So we said under historical development, when we're looking at the factors that determine political culture, we said activities from the French Revolution of 1789 and in the 19th and 20th century, right, caused the people to develop attitudes, beliefs, and perception from the revolution formed. So obviously the leaders of that particular revolution had beliefs that they obviously passed down to their followers and their members. And it's formed part of the things that determined the political culture of the people at that time and would probably have grown with them over a certain period of time. Another determinant of political culture is when we look at the European colonial domination. You do know that Nigeria was colonized by the British, and as such, those colonial masters have a sort of influence in the political culture of the people. The first set of education we had, both political and non-political, came from these colonial masters. And even post-colonial period, we still see that system being, inculcated in our political culture, and it has an influence on how we see governmental and political authority. So, we said another determinant of political culture is European colonial domination. The same way these colonial masters brought religion, and we still see people practicing that type of religion today, it's the same way the political culture and beliefs of the white people were brought down to Africa, and we see a continuation or a contributing factor to the political culture of those particular countries. So we can say colonial influence in states, countries, you can put in bracket, especially in Africa, contributes to the political culture of the people. So that's a way to look at how the European colonial masters had an influence in political culture of people. Also, ethnic differences. The ethnic differences of a particular group of people has a way of influencing the political culture of that particular set of people. As you know, Nigeria is a multi-ethnic group. We have over 300 to 400 ethnic groups, and those ethnic groups have certain beliefs, values, and cultures that in one way or another influence the political mindset that the people have. So beyond industrialization and growth in awareness and cross-state, interstate activities, where you see a lot of ethnic groups concentrated in Lagos. Beyond that, we see that people that have core into these particular ethnic groups will have a particular mindset on voting. And you see that when they're in their villages, even when things concerning voting come to bear, they just know to follow their rulers or follow their leaders without having a particular opinion of their own. So definitely, there is an impact on the political culture of people depending on their ethnic group. 4, another determinant of political culture is instability. We see that these various ethnic groups, as we said, mostly pledge allegiance or loyalty to themselves rather than the national government, right? So you see people of like minds and beliefs forming groups that have power, groups that have the ability or capacity to control, government or anything. And they pledge loyalty to those groups rather than to the national government in place. And we see how important that is in determining the political culture of the people. So by instability, we're saying that where ethnic groups or communities direct loyalty to themselves rather than to the national government, it can impact their political culture. Another factor that determines the political culture of people is the social economic structure within that particular state. So, social economic structure. This is very important. By socioeconomic structure, we're looking at the rural and urban areas because we know that society have found a way to break the system or the society into classes, mostly or significantly two classes. The upper class, which we can call the urban areas, and the lower class, which is the rural areas, which is usually based on the economic activities that occur in that particular area. Now, back to how this affects political culture. We see that in urban areas, there is what? A high standard of education within that particular area, which has the ability to encourage participation in politics. However, in rural areas, you see the people more conservative and they have more political apathy towards governmental activities. So we see how the socio-economic structure of a particular state or country has an impact on the political culture of the people. So we said the society breaks into classes. The upper class, urban areas, and the lower class, rural areas, where the latter is more conservative towards politics, while the former has educational standards that encourage participation or that encourage political participation. So we see how this difference in the class or the structure of the society has a direct impact on how the people view politics and how interested or affected they are or committed to the particular society. So, and these socio-economic structures can be seen to be influenced by industrialization. We see how, industrialization has created complex class structures. As I said, we can simply differentiate class into upper and lower group. However, It is way more complex than that in real life. And we see that these various complex class structures have varying political cultures in those separate classes. And overall, most times, it could be a combination of these factors or one of each of the factors that actually have a direct impact on the political culture of members of a particular political community. And that's why it is important for government to work towards increasing